You have 30 seconds to explain how we lost $200 million on a single contract. Jonathan Thorne's fist slammed down on the sleek glass table with enough force to make the minimalist sculptures rattle. In the executive boardroom on the 55th floor of Thorne Dynamics, 12 white female executives in tailored power suits remained silent, staring at their tablets as if the answers would magically appear on the glowing screens. Outside through the panoramic wall, Michael Vance pretended to be busy organizing blueprints at the reception desk. At 32, he had worked as an administrative assistant on that same floor for 7 long years, invisible to most of the powerful women who passed him daily as if he were part of the decor. "Mr. Thorne," stammered the vice president of finance, Sarah Albright. "Apex Innovations' proposal simply outstrips ours in every technical aspect. They've offered impossible deadlines and margins we can't even figure out how they calculated." Jonathan, heir to a $2 billion tech empire, ran his hands through his sandy blonde hair. At 58, he had never faced such a devastating string of defeats. In the last 6 months, the company had lost 5 consecutive multi-million-dollar contracts, all to the same rival. Michael bit his lower lip, fighting the urge he had felt for months. For years, he had watched these women make the same basic strategic mistakes, presenting inflated proposals and unrealistic schedules. As someone who had graduated summa cum laude from Stanford Business School, a degree he had kept tucked away in his drawer for 7 years, he recognized every glaring flaw. "How is it possible," Jonathan continued, his voice echoing through the room, "that a company founded just 3 years ago is destroying a 50-year legacy?" That's when the reception phone rang. Michael answered in his usual professional voice. "Thorne Dynamics, Michael speaking." "Mr. Vance," said the familiar voice on the other end of the line. "This is Isabella Moreno from Apex Innovations. I'd like to speak to Mr. Thorne about an acquisition proposal." Michael felt his heart race. Moreno wasn't just winning contracts. She wanted to buy the entire company. Through the glass, he saw Jonathan gesticulating furiously at his executives, completely oblivious to the fact that his corporate death warrant was literally waiting on the phone line 2 feet away. For a moment, Michael hesitated. He could simply transfer the call and watch passively as the Thorne empire crumbled before his eyes. After all, how many times had Jonathan walked past him without even a greeting? How many times had he heard whispered comments about support staff and people who know their place? But something in the way Jonathan hung his head, defeated for the first time in his privileged life, aroused an unexpected compassion in Michael. Or perhaps it was something more calculated. The realization that this moment of vulnerability could be exactly the opportunity he had been waiting for years. "Miss Moreno," Michael said calmly, "can I put you on hold for a moment? I'll check Mr. Thorne's schedule." As he put the call on hold, Michael glanced back at the boardroom. Jonathan was now leaning against the window, gazing out at the futuristic skyline of Neo-Kyoto, a city he had once ruled, unaware that his salvation or his ultimate destruction depended entirely on the next words of a man he barely knew existed. If you're enjoying this story of twists, turns, and justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how one simple decision would forever change the fate of a billion-dollar empire and prove that true talent has no gender or social class. Michael kept the call on hold as he watched Jonathan gesticulate desperately to his executives. The irony was almost cruel. The woman who controlled a billion-dollar empire was completely blind to the fact that his salvation was sitting 2 feet away, organizing his files with the precision of someone who understood every number in those reports better than anyone in the room. "I need solutions, not excuses," Jonathan shouted, his voice piercing through the glass. "Apex came out of nowhere and is systematically destroying us. How can a 3-year-old company come up with proposals that sound like they were written by wizards?" Michael took a deep breath and pressed the transfer button. "Mr. Thorne, Isabella Moreno, on line 2. Jonathan paused his tirade and looked in his direction for the first time in weeks. "Moreno now," he answered with trembling hands. "Jonathan, my old friend," Moreno's voice echoed through the speakerphone. laden with false cordiality. "I hope you're having a good day despite the recent circumstances." "What do you want, Marino? Straight to the point." "I admire that. I'm calling to make you a generous offer for Thorne Dynamics. $300 million cash on the table." The silence in the room was deafening. $300 million was less than 15% of the company's actual value just a year ago. "You're trying to buy me out for a song," Jonathan said, his voice controlled, but with anger boiling beneath the surface. "Jonathan, let's be realistic. Your company has lost 5 consecutive contracts. Your investors are nervous. Your employees are looking for other jobs. I'm offering you a dignified way out before things get even worse." Michael clenched his fists. For 7 years, he had watched Moreno grow from a small startup to Thorne's biggest rival. And for 7 years, he had watched the patterns in her victories. Always beating Thorne's bids by impossible margins, always delivering schedules that seemed to have access to insider information. "I have a question for you, Marino," Jonathan said. "How do you calculate such precise margins? How do you know exactly what components to use and when?" Moreno's laugh was genuine. "Talent, Jonathan. Something your company seems to have lost in recent years. Maybe it's time to accept that not everyone is cut out for this business." It was at that moment that Michael made a decision that would change everything. He stood up from the desk, walked over to the boardroom, and knocked on the glass door. 12 pairs of eyes watched him with surprise and irritation. "Mr. Thorne," he said calmly, "may I interrupt for a moment?" Jonathan covered the phone. "Michael, I'm on an important call." "I know. It's about Apex Innovations and how they're winning our contracts." Jonathan's expression changed from irritation to curiosity. "You have information about that?" Michael looked directly at him, his eyes reflecting a confidence he had never noticed before. "Mr. Thorne, with all due respect, I know exactly how Apex is winning. And I know why you're losing." Moreno was still on the line, probably listening to every word. "Jonathan? Who is this?" Jonathan studied Michael's face for a long moment. For the first time in 7 years, he really saw him, not as part of the decor, but as a person with something important to say. "Moreno, I'll have to call you back." "Jonathan, don't make that mistake. This offer has an expiration date." "Then I hope it's a long expiration date." Jonathan hung up the phone and turned to Michael. "You have 5 minutes. Impress me." Michael walked over to the conference table, ignoring the uncomfortable glances from the executives. He picked up the last proposal and opened it to the cost page. "You've calculated quantum processors at $850 per unit," he said, pointing to the table. "Apex offered $620. You assume she was operating at a loss, right?" "Obviously," replied CFO Albright. "It's impossible to get quality quantum processors at that price." Michael turned a few pages and pointed to another section. "But here you specified imported grade A processors. Apex used domestic grade B with specific firmware optimizations. Same performance, half the cost. Legal and within the technical specifications." The room fell silent. Jonathan leaned over the table. "How do you know that?" "Because I've read every proposal that's come across this desk for 7 years, and because I have a degree in business administration that you never bothered to find out about." The shock on the executives' faces would have been comical if it hadn't been so revealing. For 7 years, they had walked past Michael every day, never imagining that the man who organized their files knew as much about business as they did, perhaps more. "You have a degree in business administration?" Jonathan asked incredulously. "Stanford summa cum laude, specialization in project management and cost analysis." The bomb had exploded. One of the older executives, Mrs. Albright, leaned forward. "Why is a Stanford graduate working as an administrative assistant?" Michael looked her straight in the eye. "Because 7 years ago when I graduated, I received 132 job rejections. All polite, all professional, all citing that I wasn't a good fit for the company culture. Imagine that." The sarcasm in his voice cut through the air like a knife. Jonathan understood immediately. A young white man with a Stanford degree had been rejected by companies that hired mediocre white women with half his qualifications. So I took this job to pay the bills while I kept looking. But it's funny how after a few years of watching you guys make the same mistakes Moreno avoids, I realized that maybe it wasn't the other companies that were the problem. Jonathan felt the weight of every word. Go on. Moreno isn't winning because she's smarter. She's winning because you're predictable. You always specify premium components when similar ones would work. You always calculate schedules with excessive safety margins. You always assume you're the only ones who can do the job right. Michael picked up another folder from the table. And while you do that, Moreno studies your previous proposals, identifies your patterns, and offers more efficient solutions for the same results. That's impossible, said Albright. Our proposals are confidential. Michael looked at her with an expression that clearly said she was more naive than she thought. Mrs. Albright, you've been outsourcing your data processing to Cyberlink Solutions for 5 years. The CEO of Cyberlink is the brother-in-law of Apex Innovation's Chief Technical Officer. You really think your information is confidential? The silence that followed was absolute. In 5 minutes, Michael had identified not only why they were losing, but how Moreno had access to inside information. Jonathan watched him with a mixture of admiration and horror. For 7 years, he had had the solution to his problem sitting right in front of him, and he had been too arrogant to realize it. Michael, he said slowly, can you help us beat Apex? For a moment, Michael hesitated. He could just say, no, quit, and watch the Thorne Empire crumble through sheer incompetence and arrogance. It would be sweet revenge for 7 years of invisibility. But as he looked at Jonathan, really saw him perhaps for the first time, he saw something he hadn't expected. It wasn't just desperation in his eyes. It was recognition, perhaps belated, perhaps forced by circumstances, but genuine nonetheless. I can, he said finally, but not as an administrative assistant, and not for the same $35,000 a year you think my time is worth. Jonathan nodded slowly. What do you want? Michael smiled for the first time in years. Not the polite, submissive smile he wore at work, but a smile that revealed the sharp intelligence he had kept hidden for so long. I want you to find out that sometimes the most qualified person in the room isn't the one you'd expect. And I want the chance to prove that 7 years of watching you make mistakes has taught me exactly how to fix them. If you've ever felt underestimated at work, you know the power that comes with being invisible while everyone around you reveals their weaknesses, unaware that they're being watched by someone much smarter than they realize. 48 hours after the bombshell revelation in the boardroom, Michael found himself in a position he never imagined he would occupy. Sitting in the ergonomic chair that once belonged to the fired CFO, with full access to the company's systems and an impossible mission ahead of him. So, our new special consultant, Albright said, pronouncing the title with barely concealed contempt. How exactly do you intend to solve a problem that our best experts haven't been able to figure out in 6 months? Michael didn't look up from the data streams flickering across the holographic desk. First, Mrs. Albright, I'm going to need you to stop referring to me as our special consultant in that tone. Second, your best experts made mistakes that any first-year business student could spot. The silence in the room was deafening. In 1 week, Michael had gone from invisible to indispensable, but the internal resistance was palpable, especially from Albright and 2 other veteran executives who saw his meteoric rise as a direct threat. Jonathan turned to his executives. Are you sure this is wise? He may have a Stanford degree, but practical experience is very different from academic theory. Michael finally looked up, and Albright recoiled slightly at the intensity of the gaze he met. Mrs. Albright, you're right about one thing. Practical experience is important. That's why I spent the last 2 days leveraging a 0-day exploit to access Cyberlink's cloud servers. The bomb exploded again. Jonathan leaned forward. You did what? Technically, it wasn't hacking. Michael smiled for the first time in days. It was basic vulnerability assessment. I identified a backdoor left open in their legacy API, and within 20 minutes, I had complete access to their files. He connected his device to the projector, and a series of documents appeared on the screen. Here are all our proposals from the last 18 months. And here, he clicked on another folder, are the files that were accessed from the Apex Innovations terminal, always 24 to 48 hours before the proposals were submitted. Albright paled. That's industrial espionage. Not just espionage, Michael continued, his voice growing intense. It's much worse. Look at the timestamps. He pointed to a series of dates on the screen. Moreno wasn't just viewing our proposals. She was modifying some technical specifications in the original files. Jonathan rose from his chair. Modifying how? Changing component codes to slightly inferior but still acceptable versions. Adjusting timelines to create slack that didn't exist. Inserting inflated costs into specific sections. When we submitted our proposals, they already contained subtle sabotage that she knew exactly how to exploit. The revelation was devastating. Moreno wasn't just stealing information. She was actively sabotaging Thorne's proposals from within. How is that possible? Jonathan asked, visibly shaken. Michael hesitated for a moment, then made a decision that would change everything. Because Moreno has an accomplice inside this company. Someone with access to the final files before they go to print. The silence was absolute. All eyes turned to each other, suspicion weighing in the air like toxic smoke. Are you sure about this? Jonathan asked, his voice low. I'm more than sure. I have proof. Michael opened another file. Here's the access log for the Neo-Kyoto City Grid project proposal files. 3 people accessed the final file. You, Mr. Thorne, me, when I was organizing it for printing. And, he paused dramatically, someone using Mrs. Albright's login at 3 a.m., 12 hours before the presentation. Albright exploded. That's ridiculous. How dare you accuse me? I've been with this company for 15 years. Exactly, Michael said calmly. 15 years. That's enough time to develop resentment, especially when the company started losing contracts and bonuses were cut. Jonathan, you're not going to believe this. Albright struggled to find words. This white man you've dismissed for 7 years. Michael finished the sentence with a cold smile. Mrs. Albright, you're making the same mistake Moreno made. You underestimate people you consider inferior. But I have a question. How would you explain the $75,000 deposited into your personal offshore account 3 days after each lost bid? Always from a shell corporation registered at the same address as Apex Innovations. Albright recoiled as if she had been physically struck. Her face went from angry red to ashen gray in a matter of seconds. 2 can explain. You don't have to, Michael interrupted, because I've already explained everything to the Interpol Cybercrime Unit. They'll be here in about an hour to arrest you for industrial espionage and corporate fraud. The confession came pouring out. Albright collapsed into her chair, admitting everything. The years of resentment, Moreno's approach, the increasing payments, the financial pressure of a failing startup investment, and overwhelming medical bills. The woman who for 15 years had built a reputation for corporate integrity revealed herself to be a traitor willing to destroy the company that employed her. As Albright was led away by security to await the arrival of the feds, Jonathan turned to Michael with a look of admiration and terror. In 72 hours, you identified our problem, discovered our vulnerability, gathered enough evidence for a federal arrest, and exposed a traitor who worked alongside us for over a decade. What else are you hiding? Michael leaned back in his chair, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction. Mr. Thorne, 7 years of watching this company has taught me more than any college ever could. I've learned that people like Albright see me as a threat, not because I'm incompetent, but because I'm too competent for the position they think I should occupy. He opened a new folder on his laptop. And now that we've eliminated the inside leak, I can start working on the really interesting part. Destroying Apex Innovations using the same tactics they used against us. Jonathan sat up slowly. What do you have in mind? Moreno believes she knows our weaknesses because she studied our proposals for 18 months. But there's something she doesn't know. Michael smiled. And for the first time, Jonathan saw not just intelligence, but a calculated strategy shining in his eyes. I've studied her proposals for the same amount of time, and I've discovered patterns that will reveal not only how she builds her winning strategies, but also something that will destroy her completely. What kind of patterns? Michael deliberately closed his laptop. The kind that will make the next meeting between the two of you the last of her business career. At that moment, his phone vibrated with a message. Michael glanced at the screen, and his smile widened. Mr. Thorne, our situation just got even more interesting. Moreno has just requested an urgent meeting to discuss new terms for the acquisition. Apparently, Albright's arrest reached her ears faster than we expected. She wants to move up the purchase because she knows she's lost her inside source. No, Michael shook his head. She wants to move up because she believes we're vulnerable without our inside security. Moreno hasn't realized yet that Albright wasn't our weakness. She was hers. Jonathan watched Michael meticulously organize his files, each movement precise and calculated. Michael, I have a question. If you're capable of all this, why did you spend 7 years organizing my papers without saying a word? Michael paused his organizing and looked at him directly. Because sometimes, Mr. Thorne, the best strategic position is the one no one considers a threat. For 7 years, I was completely invisible to you. And invisible people see everything, hear everything, and no one ever suspects what they really know. He stood up, picking up a specific folder from the desk. And now that strategic invisibility will become the most powerful weapon Moreno has ever faced. Because she made the same mistake you all did. She assumed that competence has a specific look. As he organized the last few documents, Michael allowed himself a moment to reflect on the irony of the situation. 7 years ago, he had been rejected by 132 companies that considered his profile inappropriate for their corporate cultures. Now, that same inappropriateness was about to save a billion-dollar empire and completely destroy its main rival. Moreno requested the meeting for tomorrow at 9 a.m., he said, checking his phone again. That's enough time to prepare the presentation that will end our corporate war once and for all. Jonathan nodded, but something in Michael's expression intrigued him. You seem very confident for someone who discovered an internal betrayal just a few hours ago. Michael smiled, and this time, Jonathan saw something that made him question whether he really knew the man who had worked alongside him for 7 years. Mr. Thorne, can I make a confession? I've suspected Albright for over 2 years. I just needed time and access to gather enough evidence. 2 years? And you never said anything? Because until now, I've never been asked my opinion on anything important. And because some revenge. He paused, his eyes flashing with an intensity Jonathan had never seen before. Needs to be served at the exact moment to have the maximum impact. As Michael finalized his preparations for the final showdown with Moreno, a single question hung in the air. If he had strategically planned Albright's downfall for 2 whole years, maintaining absolute silence while meticulously gathering evidence, what other secrets could such a calculating mind be keeping for the perfect moment of revelation? The next morning, Moreno arrived at Thorne Dynamics, accompanied by 2 lawyers and an accountant, clearly expecting to formalize the purchase of a collapsing company. His confident smile vanished when she found Michael sitting at the conference table next to Jonathan, with a stack of documents organized in front of him. Mr. Thorne, Moreno said, completely ignoring Michael, I hope you've reconsidered my offer, especially after the recent developments with your staff. Yes, Moreno, Jonathan replied calmly. The developments have been very enlightening. Michael, would you begin? Michael smiled coldly and opened the first file. Miss Moreno, before we discuss any acquisition, I would like to clarify a few points regarding your business practices. Moreno finally looked at him, annoyed. And you are? I'm Michael Vance, Director of Strategic Operations at Thorne Dynamics. And you, Miss Moreno, are about to find out what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. He connected his laptop to the projector. The first image showed bank transfers. Here are the payments your company made to Albright over the course of 18 months. $75,000 for confidential information. Moreno's face remained impassive, but her lawyers exchanged nervous glances. This is just the beginning, Michael continued, moving to the next screen. Here are the modifications you made to our files through Albright's access. Industrial sabotage documented with precise timestamps. You can't prove anything, Moreno said, but her voice had lost its previous confidence. Michael smiled. I can, and I will, because while you thought you were playing us, I was playing you. He clicked on another file. Recognize this email, Miss Moreno. It's from your personal account to Albright detailing exactly what information you needed for each proposal. Moreno paled. How did you get my personal emails? The same way you got our files. The difference is, I'm better at it. Michael opened a new folder. 3 months ago, when you hacked our systems through Albright, I was watching. And while you were gathering our information, I was gathering yours. The revelation hit Moreno like a bolt of lightning. She had been monitored for months without knowing it. Here's my favorite, Michael said, playing an audio file. Moreno's voice echoed through the room. Those idiots at Thorne are so predictable. With Albright feeding us everything, we can lower our bids and still win every time. It's almost unfair. Where did you get that recording? Moreno exploded. Albright used a Thorne company cell phone. All calls are recorded for training and quality purposes. Did you know that, Miss Moreno? Moreno stood up abruptly. This was a trap. No, Michael corrected. This was justice. You spent 18 months stealing information, sabotaging bids, and destroying a 50-year-old company. You thought you were untouchable because no one would suspect your tactics. He opened one last file. But here's what you didn't know. During those 18 months, you lost 3 major contracts that they didn't even try to get through us. Want to know why? Moreno didn't answer, but her desperate expression was answer enough. Because your illegal methods became your only strategy. When you tried to compete honestly, you discovered that your company is mediocre. You're a second-rate con artist masquerading as a business genius. Michael stood up, picking up a final folder. The Interpol Cybercrime Unit will be at your company in about an hour. Industrial espionage, corporate fraud, system intrusion. Albright has confessed everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. Moreno was now visibly shaking. What do you want? Justice, Jonathan replied. Michael, can you show her the last item? Michael smiled one last time. During your 18 months of sabotaging our company, you also sabotaged 3 of your own contracts without knowing it. The files Albright stole included false information that I planted specifically for you. Congratulations, Miss Moreno. You destroyed yourself with your own weapons. The room fell silent as Moreno processed that she had been outmaneuvered by someone she had considered irrelevant for 7 years. Michael, Jonathan said with genuine admiration, how did you plan all this? 7 years of watching, Mr. Thorne. Long enough to learn that true intelligence isn't about being the smartest person in the room, but about letting your opponents think they're smarter than you. 6 months later, Michael was sitting in his new office on the 58th floor, now as Executive Vice President of Strategic Growth at Thorne Dynamics, with a 20% share of the company's profits. The position had been created specifically for him after he saved not only the company but expanded it into 3 new international markets. Moreno was serving an 8-year sentence for industrial espionage. Her company had been liquidated, her assets confiscated, and her name had become synonymous with corporate failure in business circles. Michael, Jonathan said, walking into his office with a report. We just closed the biggest deal in company history. $750 million. A new contract for the Mars colony infrastructure. He smiled, looking out the window at the city he now saw from a completely different perspective. Funny how things change when you finally allow competence to be recognized, regardless of appearances. Jonathan nodded, visibly embarrassed. Michael, I need to apologize for the 7 years I— No, you don't, he interrupted gently. Those 7 years taught me something valuable. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest strategic advantage you can have. That afternoon, Michael received a call from Stanford asking him to give a lecture on corporate leadership. The man who had once been rejected by 132 companies was now being invited to teach others about success. The best revenge, he always told young professionals, is not to destroy those who underestimated you. It's to build something so great that they can never deny your competence again. Moreno had tried to destroy a company by attacking its weaknesses. Michael saved it by revealing its true strengths, starting with recognizing that talent has no color, social class, or expected appearance. If this story of perseverance and justice has touched you, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that competence always finds its way, even when the world tries to keep it invisible.